Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story where a well-intentioned, incredibly ambitious civic PR stunt collided head-on with an unpredictable force of nature. We're looking at Ohio's 1986 balloon disaster, an event that started with soaring hopes but ultimately ended in an absolute tragedy.
Okay, let's just start with a staggering number to set the stage. 1.5 million. That is the exact amount of balloons a single city planned to launch into the sky, all at exactly the same time. Just try to visualize that volume for a second. It's an absolute logistical mountain to climb, and as we're about to uncover, it was essentially an environmental nightmare just waiting to be unleashed.
Section 1. Cleveland's Grand Rebranding Plan.
So, back in 1986, city leaders in Cleveland were desperately trying to shed their rough reputation, right? They wanted to prove they were well on their way to becoming a world-class city. And their strategy? Well, the United Way decided the perfect way to clean up the city's image was to totally shatter the world record for the largest simultaneous balloon launch. The record holder at the time was Disneyland, who had just set it the year prior. For whatever reason, local leaders thought that outdoing Disneyland was the ultimate surefire way to grab positive headlines and put Cleveland back on the map.
They called this massive charity fundraiser Balloon Fest, and pulling it off was no joke. It required 6 solid months of intensive planning and relied on 3 absolutely monumental steps. Step 1, they had to build a net the actual size of a city block just to hold the balloons down. Step 2, they needed thousands of volunteers to spend hours filling all these balloons with helium. And Step 3, the grand finale, releasing nearly 1.5 million balloons into the sky.
Section 2. A storm and missing men. But while the entire city is excitedly gearing up for this massive celebration, a much darker, completely separate narrative was quietly unfolding just to the east on Lake Erie. The sequence of events is actually pretty chilling when you see how they collided. 12 hours prior to the launch, a severe storm hits and fishermen go missing. By the morning of the event, families report them missing and a Coast Guard search begins. That afternoon, the balloons are released prematurely, and 48 hours later, the search is officially called off.
To give you a bit more context on that, the night before, about an hour before that severe thunderstorm rolled through, 2 men had gone out fishing. By the morning of September 27th, which is the exact day of Balloon Fest, their boat was found abandoned on Lake Erie. Authorities immediately suspected the men had fallen overboard in the rough weather, which prompted the Coast Guard to launch an urgent search and rescue mission.
Section 3. The record-breaking launch.
Meanwhile, as authorities are desperately scanning the choppy water, the mood back in Cleveland's public square is entirely different. Over 100,000 eager people had gathered to witness this triumph. At first, organizers were relieved because the storm from the previous night had cleared out. But you know how the weather is, it took another turn. A major rainstorm was suddenly closing in fast. The balloons were already filled, waiting under that massive net. Rescheduling wasn't an option at that point, so organizers were forced to release the balloons ahead of schedule. And this right here perfectly illustrates the mechanical failure of the whole stunt. The expectation was pretty standard. Helium-filled balloons float around for a while, eventually deflate and drift back down to Earth safely, one by one. But reality had other plans. The cold air and the oncoming rain basically acted like a physical wall, immediately battering tens of thousands of still inflated balloons straight back down toward the ground.
Section 4. Chaos in the streets. The sudden descent of all those balloons caused absolute mass chaos. We're talking immediate urban paralysis. The wind blew them right over to Burke Lakefront Airport, clogging the runway so badly that all flights had to be suspended entirely. On the city streets, the swirling balloons blinded drivers, triggering multiple car accidents. It actually became such an overwhelming hazard that roads were completely shut down until, and I'm not kidding, a bulldozer arrived to physically plow the balloons out of the way.
Section 5. A hopeless rescue mission.
But honestly, the urban gridlock, that was just an inconvenience compared to the literal life-or-death crisis happening out on the water. Organizers originally figured, okay, maybe 10% of the balloons will drift over the lake. Instead, a staggering 60% of those 1.5 million balloons crashed directly into Lake Erie, the exact same waters where the Coast Guard was actively searching for those 2 missing fishermen.
You can feel the sheer desperation of the situation in this actual dispatch from the Coast Guard. They said, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Can you imagine trying to find somebody floating out here or even spotting a life jacket with all these balloons on the water? Every single bobbing, colorful balloon looked exactly like a person's head or a life vest. It made spotting a human being basically impossible.
Section 6. The disastrous legacy.
It is just incredibly tragic. The search efforts were doomed by the very spectacle that was meant to uplift the city. Those balloons created an impenetrable visual barrier that entirely sabotaged the rescue. 2 days after the massive launch, on September 29th, the Coast Guard had absolutely no choice but to call off the mission. The surface of the water was just too compromised, and shortly after the search ended, the bodies of both missing men washed ashore.
So, Cleveland did technically achieve their goal. Balloon Fest was indeed featured in the 1988 Guinness Book of World Records. But here's the catch. That was the only edition to ever include it. The disastrous, fatal consequences of the event made Guinness realize the inherent danger, and shortly after, they permanently retired the entire category of balloon launching. The whole shebang gone. It's a devastating chain of events, and it really leaves us with a heavy thought to chew on. When civic pride blinds us to natural risks, who pays the ultimate price? When sheer ambition completely ignores the unpredictable power of nature, who truly bears the cost? It is a sobering reminder of the unintended consequences of spectacle. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking questions.